From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
The race for Attorney General has already been tumultuous, and it's only been a week. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Craven ended his campaign after just 4 days amid intense scrutiny of his past. Craven's exit means the Democratic primary is now wide open and could spark an even more intense contest over who will replace Peter Neronha. This week on Newsmakers, the man Neronha wants to be his successor, Democratic AG candidate Keith Hoffmann.
This is pretty cool.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. On the second half of the program, we have a reporters roundtable to break down a very busy news cycle, but we welcome on the first half Keith Hoffmann. He's the Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Keith, good to have you in the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
60 seconds or less. Why do you want to be the next Attorney General of Rhode Island?
I want to be the next Attorney General of Rhode Island because I believe I have the experience and the energy and the ability to confront the many crises facing our state in a very difficult period.
I want to touch on this quick because I mentioned it at the top of the program. We had big news yesterday. We're taping this on a Friday morning. The perceived leading candidate in the race for AG, State Rep Bob Craven, dropped out Thursday, hours before Target 12 was set to air a report with new information about his past conduct and legal troubles. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, look, being the Attorney General it's a lot about integrity and honesty. My father passed away when I was a kid, and he wrote me a letter before he died. And he said, focus on being honest and being true to yourself. Nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, sometimes terrible mistakes. I'm really thinking of Chair Craven and his family right now during what must be a really difficult time for them.
We don't need to belabor the Craven issue, so let me turn to some of the things you talked about in your kickoff speech. You spent a lot of time talking about the threat you see from President Trump's administration. And for people who don't know your background, before getting into this race, you were chief of policy for Attorney General Neronha, and you played a leading role in crafting the litigation. It feels like they sue Trump every day at Neronha's office right now. I'm just curious, with all these lawsuits, all this litigation, do you think that strategy is being effective right now?
I do. We aren't suing them every day. We sue them, and we have sued them, when the federal administration breaks the law and it harms Rhode Islanders. There has been a lot of litigation, probably about 12 cases filed here in Rhode Island, and maybe 40 or 50 filed by the Democratic attorneys general around the country.
That's a lot of lawsuits.
It's a lot of lawsuits, but they're targeted. We don't sue the Trump administration when they have a policy that we disagree with merely, or when they just do something that we don't like. The lawsuits happen when there is harm to our state, to the people of our state, and we have the ability to address it. And those lawsuits have been largely very effective in stopping this president and his administration from harming Rhode Islanders in many different ways.
Well, to that point, there's a lot of debate among Democrats, or Trump opponents, even outside of the Democratic Party, about whether this country's in a constitutional crisis. And I was interested to read comments at a recent event by Justice Amy Coney Barrett of the Supreme Court. She said, quote, "We would clearly be in a constitutional crisis if the rule of law crumbles, but that is not the place where we are." Do you agree or disagree with Justice Barrett?
Look, I agree. I think that the moment when and if this administration begins ignoring Supreme Court orders or otherwise court orders, we will be in a constitutional crisis. That has not happened. There's been this sort of passive-aggressive trying to get around court orders. I'll acknowledge that. But I think it's important to tell the people of Rhode Island that the administration, when we have gotten federal court orders to, for example, protect some of our agencies, like our federal library agency, when there's an order in place to protect the incredibly important Revolution Wind project, those orders have been, the administration has abided by those orders. So I think that the rule of law is certainly under threat. And when I'm Attorney General, if I'm elected, I would ensure that the rule of law in Rhode Island is firm and resilient.
You know, it's clear from your campaign announcement, from your video, you're going to continue to carry on this mantle, or at least you said, and potentially filing lawsuits against the Trump administration if you think they violated the law. And you mentioned the other states. The difference between Rhode Island and almost all other states, maybe except Delaware's, they have district attorneys. And those district attorneys handle the vast majority of criminal cases. The AG's office in Rhode Island does that. And for the people concerned that you're putting so much weight into going after the Trump administration, and it's at the expense of a core part of the Attorney General's office, which is public safety, what do you say?
Oh, public safety is a paramount part of the Attorney General's office, and we would never do anything to undermine that. And I certainly would not undermine that in any way as Attorney General. We have to make sure that our communities are safe. Absolutely, that's a baseline. The Attorney General's office prosecutes violent crime in this state, and I'll assure that those prosecutions are aggressive and effective if I'm elected Attorney General.
What was the most significant criminal case you've been directly involved with?
So I've been involved in many criminal cases and investigations during my time in the Attorney General's office. I sat on the leadership team for the Attorney General's office, and we made decisions about significant criminal matters. I handled and was involved in a variety of hate crime cases, police misconduct cases. And, you know, look, I think that public safety, as I said, is incredibly important to the mission of the Attorney General's office. I would ensure that that mission is effectively carried out.
I want to ask you about the big hubbub right now about the Washington Bridge audit, which, to remind people, the reason it's involved is the Attorney General's office is because the AG's office is leading this lawsuit against the bridge contractors that was originally going to be started by Governor McKee. It's a rare thing. We've seen Attorney General Noronha defend Governor McKee for not releasing this audit before it leaked, saying that was the legal advice he was given by both the outside lawyers initially and by Noronha's office, because it's part of, you don't want to litigate in public, et cetera, et cetera. That said, from the feedback we've gotten in the newsroom, the public doesn't like that. People feel like they should have been allowed to see this. The defense attorneys in it have it. And to just say we can't have a real discussion about DOT because of the lawsuit for years based on the advice of the lawyers frustrates people. Do you agree that it was wise to keep this secret?
Well, look, I think it's an incredibly challenging situation that balances two important interests. One is the interest in transparency, which is hugely important to the Attorney General's office and would be important to me and if I'm elected. The other is ensuring that the taxpayer is fairly compensated when they are harmed. And this is, the Attorney General said recently that there was a concern about tainting the jury if these sorts of documents are released. This is only one document of thousands, as I understand it, in the litigation. I think that's a legitimate concern. And so if I'm elected Attorney General, I would seek to ensure that this litigation continues on track. And yes, that we balance those interests between, of course, tainting a jury and ensuring that that doesn't happen, and the public's interest in transparency and understanding what happened with the Washington Bridge.
I want to ask you about public records, and you understand this, but so people at home understand it. The Attorney General's office handles the vast majority of disputes between the public and government agencies when it comes to transparency. There's been a push in recent years to reform the state's public records law, known as APRA. It gained a lot of momentum. It involves law enforcement interests, makes requirements to the Attorney General's office in the bill, and advocates argue it will increase transparency, but it has faced significant headwind from particularly the McKee administration. What parts of the bill do you support?
So I generally support more transparency in government. That particular bill, I would have to look back and understand in particular what the concerns of the McKee administration were.
Well, let me quickly rattle off some key elements. I can do this fast. The APRA would, the bill would make police incident reports a public record. Do you support or oppose that?
Making police incident reports a public record. I think that entirely, including the name of the victim and
things can be redacted. Right now, we can't access those. So, in general,
so I would say, look, I think that there's a strong public interest in things like police reports, of course, criminal records. You do have to ensure. I think that the balancing test that we have now under the APRA is a good system that allows for for the Attorney General and for a person who's seeking to access public records to make an argument about what should be released and what shouldn't be.
If we do a debate for the AG's office, we have a rapid fire section. I'm going to hold you to a shorter answer. We're running short on time, so I'm just going to ask you about one more because it involves the Attorney General's office. The bill would increase the fines for government agencies that willfully violate APRA. Would you support an increase in fines?
I think that for willful violation, I think that's appropriate.
Okay, very good. Keith Hoffmann, goes by quick. Thank you so much, and I do hope that if we hold when we hold a debate for Attorney General, you commit to debating your opponent.
Of course.
Excellent. He's a Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Thank you for joining us, Keith Hoffmann. When we come back, a reporters roundtable. Patrick Anderson from the Providence Journal joins us. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is Ted Nesi. We're doing a reporters roundtable, and we welcome back Patrick Anderson, Providence Journal. Good to have you.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's start with this, gentlemen. As we were walking on set this morning, the current Attorney General, Peter Nerona, announced he is not running for governor. Your reactions?
Well, I think it's. I think I didn't really expect him to run because he, while he's talked about it a lot, he hasn't been taking the steps that you would be at this point, even though I take him at his word he was serious. I think it very much narrows the scope of possibilities for this Democratic primary for governor next year. I think Joe Fleming, if he was here, our political analyst, would say it's probably not great news for Dan McKee, who could really use a split field that lowers what you need to win. But it does still leave open the Joe Shekarchi question.
Yeah, not surprised. There have been some really good photos posted on social media by the Attorney General of how much he's enjoying sailing on Narragansett Bay and not being at fundraisers raising the money that he would probably need to compete in a race like this. I agree with Ted. The split field aspect is so huge in this primary. Depending on how many candidates do or don't get into the race, it really changes the dynamic if it's just a head-to-head between Folks and McKee, or if you've got 3 or 4 Democrats. It's quite different. And I think both Shekarchi and Nerona were looking at the prospect of having to share a lot of voters with Folks and seeing how they were going to pick, how they were going to get their own lane and their own base outside of Folks' voters.
Well, there was a test with voters that came out, was it this week or end of last?
This week.
Well, God, this week has been bananas. So it's a new UNH poll, and we're going to bring up Governor Dan McKee's job approval first. These are likely voters, and the job approval...
This is actually the full electorate.
Thank you. The likely voters was for the next slide we're going to do. But this one, he has a 24% job approval rating, a whopping 71% disapprove, and a very low. People seem to have made up their mind here. And Ted, we should note his approval number actually went up from the last UNH poll, right? That was 19%.
Yeah, it was 19% last time, so a little, better than falling to 15 or 14, but obviously 24 is a very hard number for an incumbent.
Let's bring up the theoretical primary race right now that UNH tested between Helena Folks, Democratic candidate for governor, who has announced, and Dan McKee. Right now, 35% to 19%, but that undecided number, Patrick, is very high, 40%. You look at that right now, again, we're a year out. A lot is going to happen. We don't know who else is going to run in the race. All that being said, these are likely voters. What's your take on those?
I still think, even though Helena Folks ran in the last gubernatorial election, I still think a lot of voters, a lot of average Rhode Islanders do not have strong feelings about her, know her very well. I don't think they have made up their mind about her. And that puts this race in flux. It still leaves the door open for another candidate to get in. It still leaves room for the governor to be reelected. It's still a wild card. She has not locked down anything yet. But given McKee's approval rating, has in a reasonable position. It's a better position than a lot of challengers go into a race against an incumbent with.
And if we can put the numbers up again, those poll numbers, I think this shows why we're saying what we are about Nerona. McKee you've got to think that 19% is not going to, he has 19, let's say 20% of the electorate in this Democratic primary.
That could be a ceiling?
Locked down. A floor, I think.
Okay.
Right? Because,
now I understand.
With everything that's happened, the bridge, whatever you want to say that's caused Dan McKee's overall numbers to go as far, those that 1 in 5 Democratic primary voters are staying with him now. Problem is that number is so low that unless you have a very split field, or he can grow it significantly, which we just haven't seen signs of, that's why people are saying, well, if Noronha and Shekarchi got in and everyone's getting 20-something% of the vote, maybe Dan McKee can squeak through. He doesn't want to have to be in a primary where he needs to win 51% to Helena Foulkes' 49. That is just very hard with his overall approval where it is.
Especially because one thing that jumped off the page to me, Ted, it was the governor's struggle in his own party among voters who identify as Democrats.
Yeah, I believe it was 20%, only 20% of
Yes.
Democrats in that survey said he deserves re-election. I mean, let's be honest. This is why most observers, when I talk to people outside the state, the Cook Political Report just did a big analysis of the race. They're looking at the numbers and they say this is not a scenario where usually you would see someone forge ahead with running for re-election. Certainly Lincoln Chafee didn't when he was in a similar position in 2013. Bruce Sunland did and wound up getting, I think, maybe only 27% of the vote or something like that in his final primary. So, we know Governor McKee. We know he's committed to what he's committed to, and in this case, it's I'm going to run. He firmly believes his record is better than the current public perception of it, but it is a very uphill battle, especially for someone who doesn't even have a campaign manager yet at the moment.
All right, we're going to go ahead, Patrick.
And that's why you have all this talk with Shekarchi's camp of trying to get McKee, trying to show him these numbers and say, get out, because then the math completely changes for Shekarchi, or probably Shekarchi, but a candidate to then move in, and then it's a head-to-head with Foulkes. The whole thing changes. So that is Shekarchi's strategy right now, but there's no sign right now that McKee is going to listen to that argument and not run.
Just to keep it going for one more sec, the Craven thing that we talked about in the beginning of in the Attorney General's race shows how much could happen and change in the scenario. It's still early October, 11 months out from this primary. So much can change, as Patrick just alluded to. I would also say this. There is such opportunity both in the Democratic primary and the general election if Dan McKee somehow wins the nomination. Yes, as Republican Chairman Powers said on this show a couple weeks ago, it's hard to see where a Republican would have the money in a Trump environment to win, but could Ken Block run as an independent? I am spitballing. I'm just trying to think of a name and how you might do it. I just wonder about unexpected things in this unstable of a political environment.
A lot to watch. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, a seismic report saw the light of day with the Washington Bridge. We're going to talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is Ted Nesi, and we're joined by Patrick Anderson from the Providence Journal. I want to talk about the Washington Bridge. So the forensic audit a week ago today burst into the public's view. It's a key document in the ongoing litigation the state has against contractors that worked on the bridge. Bottom line of the document, years of neglect and poor inspections factored into the bridge's failure. Patrick, is this audit a flash in the pan, or do you think it's going to continue to have ripple effects moving forward?
No, it's going to have ripple effects, and there are going to be more documents. There are thousands of documents about the bridge that have been turned over in this lawsuit, and this is not the last one that is going to be shared with people by different parties in the lawsuits. There is probably going to be a drip, drip, drip of additional documents, and it's going to be a topic in the governor's race for the next year. It's going to be brought up by Helena Foulkes every time she can. So it's not going to go away.
And oversight hearings at the General Assembly.
And which probably will not reveal much going on the history of oversight.
Right.
Yes. But they'll keep it alive.
I get the sense that maybe the General Assembly is a little more primed.
I'm very trust but verify with them, whether they're going to actually do anything.
Their history interviewing Director Alviti is a little mixed. Let's say.
Speaking of Director Alviti, this is renewed questions, obviously, about his future at the Department of Transportation. Kim Kalunian asked Governor McKee about what the audit could mean for Alviti on 12 News at 4. Here's what the governor had to say.
And you have full confidence in Director Alviti's leadership?
Well, I do. And, obviously that is something that is measured every day. Everybody that I work with, if they're delivering and they are, then I'm really pleased. And if they're not, then we're going to keep on, trying to encourage them to do better. But in fact, at this point in time, I have no intentions of moving anywhere in the DOT leadership team.
So, Ted, unless something changes, sticking by him.
Yeah, and I mean, fundamentally, that is the fork in the road that Governor McKee chose right when the bridge failed, right? Was that, I've had people, again, in other states say, I can't believe your transportation director, his fault or not, wasn't a sacrificial lamb for the governor's sake. But Governor McKee, very loyal to anyone who works with or for him, as we know. And also, they have deep shared ties to the laborers union. I think that's an important part of the alliance going on here. And look, Dan McKee, I think, probably sees a little kinship with Peter Alviti, where Dan McKee himself feels he is unfairly blamed for things, doesn't get enough credit for good work he's done, and they're men of the same generation. So I think there's a lot going on there.
Is it a damned if you do, damned if you don't at this point as well? Do you think if he were to shed?
Oh, he can't. Yeah, he cannot let go of Director Alviti at this point. And his job security is probably better than any other cabinet director at this point, because they would be admitting in the governor's race that was a mistake and that he's then caving to pressure. So I don't think at this point he can do that. But I have been surprised that the McKee administration is so surprised at the reaction to this forensic report and the belief that I think they had that this could be kept secret for the duration of the case, or that when it was out that it would not be seen as a big deal, and that they could just say, well, it's a lawsuit, this issue that we said we were going to get to the bottom of, that the public wants to get to the bottom of, it's just going to go away, and we can't answer any questions about the underlying issues of what went wrong with the bridge. That never seemed like it was going to fly.
And there's fundamentally no answer. You heard it there with the governor, with Kim, to what has been done to prevent another Washington bridge crisis in terms of reform in DOT. People don't see a visible change with Director Alviti leaving. The governor talks there about all of leadership at DOT being kept in place and basically says they're doing a good job. Yes, lots of other bridges are being built.
And if you criticize them, it's a lawsuit. We cannot be criticized. Right, There's a lawsuit. That reflects on the Washington Bridge. Yep. It just doesn't.
I do also wonder, back to the Alviti question, if there isn't a legal concern if the governor were to move on from the director.
But with Kim asked, and he explicitly ruled out. He said, "There's been no legal advice. I can't make personnel changes. It's my decision."
No, I understand that, but if that isn't a factor in the back of his mind, if it could affect litigation.
They've set the bar that everything anything involving DOT now is going to hurt the lawsuit.
As you can hear, it's frustrating to journalists, as you can clearly hear, and that is the problem in covering these things. And when you have a big lawsuit out there, it always acts as sort of a shield to transparency.
Say too, I know I've said this before on the show, but I always look back to when the credit union crisis happened. Bruce Sunland very quickly commissioned a report from the head of Brown University, what went wrong here with the credit unions. And it was meant to be kind of warts and all, and also to clear the air a bit. And that sort of thing never happened here, and I think it's why this desire for a more public airing of what really went wrong has remained a frustration.
There are a little bit of echoes of 38 Studios in this, because that was another one where there was a lawsuit.
Don't drop a 38 Studios at the end of the show. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.